Welcome to Is It the Podcast? From Rembrandt to Rubens, from Van Dyck to Van Eyck, each episode examines an artwork with an uncertain authorship, in dialogue with a leading guest expert. We'll tell the story of the artist we suspect created the work, of the work in question, and then we reveal the results of a cutting-edge AI authentication analysis performed by the Swiss firm Art Recognition. I'm your host, Professor Noah Charney. So, is it? This episode is about the guidelines on the ethical use of AI for image analysis and art authentication. AI is everywhere, but that means that the term is being used with sometimes reckless abandon. For any serious field like art attribution, it's important to lay out recommendations for how best and most effectively to use AI. These guidelines were developed jointly by Art Recognition and the Center for Art Law, with a little help from me, and they offer a framework for how artificial intelligence can be used responsibly, transparently, and collaboratively in the authentication of artworks. To discuss the guidelines, I've invited Carina Popovici, co-founder of Art Recognition and a past guest on this podcast, and Irina Tarsis of the Center for Art Law. The three of us were the main drivers of these guidelines, with significant feedback and input from a variety of others, mainly lawyers working with the Center for Art Law. Regular listeners will be familiar with Carina, and there's a full episode interview with her if you'd like more. Irina Tarsis is a lawyer and art historian who has written extensively on provenance, authenticity, cultural heritage, and artists' rights. Under her leadership, the Center for Art Law has grown from a blog into a global forum offering resources, legal clinics, case law database, and the monthly podcast, Art in Brief. You can explore the Center's work at their website, itsartlaw.org. In fact, that's one of the two places you can find and read the guidelines, which are openly available. Itsartlaw.org or Art Recognition's website, art-recognition.com. For anyone interested in the intersection of art, law, and ethics, Irina Tarsis and the Center for Art Law provide invaluable guidance and insight. So what do the guidelines cover? The core idea is simple. AI should extend human judgment, not replace it. The document emphasizes that the best results happen when AI developers and art experts work together, from the selection of training data to the interpretation of AI-generated reports. In this sense, technology and connoisseurship form a symbiotic partnership. The guidelines outline several objectives. They call for AI models that are scientifically sound and ethically responsible, and they encourage art professionals to adopt AI thoughtfully in ways that enhance rather than undermine traditional methods of studying artworks. A significant portion of the guideline deals with technical standards. Developers are urged to maintain clear documentation, communicate model limitations openly, and provide users with understandable explanations of how the AI system works. Transparency is a key to trust. There is also a strong emphasis on the importance of training datasets. The quality, relevance, and integrity of these datasets determine how reliable an AI model can be. Datasets should contain both positive and negative examples and must be assembled in consultation with art experts to avoid distortions or ambiguous material. The guidelines stress that AI models for authentication should be purpose-built with rigorous testing and cross-validation to measure reliability. Because art authentication poses unique challenges, generic AI systems are not enough. Legal and ethical considerations are also front and center. AI raises questions around copyright and intellectual property, as well as cultural heritage and privacy. Both developers and users must ensure that they have proper licenses for training data and that the use of AI tools respects the rights of artists, institutions, and communities. Crucially, AI outputs should never be presented as final or definitive. They must always be corroborated by traditional methods. Conservation science, provenance research, and expert connoisseurship remain essential. AI has enormous potential to improve art authentication and attribution, and it's already shown its strength in doing so, but only if it's used with care and integrity. Ethical frameworks, transparency, and close collaboration between technicians and art experts are essential. With these principles in place, AI can become a powerful and responsible tool that strengthens rather than disrupts the art world. So thank you, Irina and Carina, for taking the time to speak about this new venture that we co-wrote with the help of some others, the Framework for Responsible Use of AI in Art Authentication. And I'd like to begin with two quite basic questions. First, for Carina, where did this idea come from? And then I'll ask you, Irina, to talk us through what's in the text.
So this idea is actually on my mind for a few years now. And it all started when we went through a rather, unpleasant experience, if I can call it like that. So I'm not sure if our listeners have ever heard of a painting that's known as the Debussy Madonna, but I think it's worth explaining what happened. I think it was back in 2022 when a group of researchers from a British university, they announced that their AI had discovered a new Raphael, and that made like really headlines everywhere. But unfortunately, most of the art historians who looked at the painting didn't believe that it was by Raphael actually. And what happened was that that announcement essentially created like a huge wave of negativity towards AI in general in the art world. And we were kind of like indirectly caught up into this. So then eventually we decided to analyze it ourselves, and our AI actually came to the opposite conclusion. So it returned like a not Raphael result with a very high probability. So then, we had no choice but to start digging deeper and to, understand why was such a big difference between the two AI models. And then we had realized, that the other model wasn't an art authentication model at all. Actually, it was a facial recognition system. So the one that's used in surveillance cameras. So what's been done in that case was like to compare the face of this Madonna with another Raphael Madonna. So a genuine Madonna housed in Dresden, I think. And that software just showed that the two faces look similar. But of course, that doesn't mean that they were painted by the same artist. It literally meant that they looked the same. But unfortunately, the scientists, they rushed to announce that their AI has found this new Raphael, even though, this claim wasn't supported by their own study. So that was really strange. And then later we also found that their model only trained on a half of the Raphael data set. And then we asked why they did this. They could not explain. So this experience, this story was really like a turning point for me, because it made me realize how easily the keyword, AI can be misused, and how the public, understandably doesn't always know the difference, between a proper scientific approach and something that just sounds like high tech. So then I started thinking, as AI becomes more widely used in art authentication, not everyone in the space might follow, the same level of scholarly rigor that we do. And I think that's very dangerous. So not just for the technology's reputation, but for the art world as a whole. And that's the idea. So that's where the idea of the framework came from. And so at that point in time, I had started thinking that we really need to find a way, to set like clear standards. So to make sure that everyone working with AI in this field, it does uphold the same scientific, ethical principle that we use, but also that the people, so art historians and experts and collectors even, so regular people more or less, who rely on these tools and engage these companies, they actually understand, how they work. And, that's how it started. And after 3 years, so the document is finally ready. As it's been reviewed, commented on by professionals from both the art and tech communities. And I think that's really great. And I'm really happy that we have achieved this. And I think it's not just, a step forward towards higher standards, but also a bridge. So something that's really meant to bring together art historians and AI developers.
Carina, that was a really good description. I'm glad you mentioned the Debussy Madonna case, because that's how I first heard about you, actually. That was a long time ago. But I remember thinking as soon as I started reading the article and that the recognition of faces of Raphael's holy figures was somehow definitive, any art historian who's taken Art History 101 would know that Raphael famously had all of his holy figure faces look exactly the same. He had this composite of the most beautiful ears and eyes and eyebrows and cheeks that he kept in a journal. And then he cobbled together this ideal face. And if it was a man, he just stuck a beard on. And if it was a woman, he didn't. And all of his angels and saints and holy figures, they all looked the same. And also people in his circle like Perugino and Pinturicchio. So it's probably the least useful artist to use facial recognition on. And of course, that's just one of lots of components. And the danger is that if somebody reads, this is what AI does, and it doesn't make sense to them, or it seems like a superficial intervention, then they might lose confidence in the technology and its application in image analysis. And that would be a shame. And people are using the term AI so much, but you have to always ask the question, okay, what do you mean by that? What's the data set? Is it closed or open? What sort of material are you feeding it? And you have to keep in mind that it's such a catchphrase now. It's like saying, I'm going to forensically investigate something. And then it says, okay, well, what tests are you going to do? Are you going to do infrared spectroscopy? Are you going to do an X-ray? Are you going to do, carbon dating? What are you going to do with that? And if you don't know the answer to that question, or if it feels like superficially throwing around a catchphrase, then that's in no one's best interest long-term, especially not in the best interest of firms that really do their homework and take it seriously and have a grown-up approach to it. So that it's a very good case in point, which brings us to the concept of developing a framework for responsible use of AI and art authentication to try to lay out what a small group of people thinking deeply about this feel is best practice. So, Irina, can you tell us a little bit about what this document looks like and what people can find in it?
Thank you, Noah, and thank you, Carina, for inviting me and for inviting Center for Art Law into this project. We are very interested in the use of AI in general in the art market and the art-related worlds. And the document that we helped co-author, which you have worked on very extensively and has a lot of interesting technical information, is intended as aspirational. It's positioning perhaps itself as soft law. It's not going to be binding on anybody, but it offers good practices for companies that are looking to enter the AI and art authentication field, and for users of this new tool for a practice that is not new at all. It's a bit like a fairy tale with a modern twist, right? The goal of the framework is to identify how AI can benefit the practice of art authentication and encourage transparency of AI developers to think carefully about the use or the information that will be used for ultimately building these models. It underscores the need for the human and AI collaboration. I think, like in the past, where art authentication required multiple experts and multiple ways of approaching the problem, AI models will be an additional step in trying to identify what is the work of art in question. And we are hoping that the data sets that will be used and the models that will be used will be built in a responsible, ethical way, not only technically speaking in training data sets, but also in legal and ethical sense, because we know that the materials that will be used or are used in these models are creations of others. We're all standing on the shoulders of giants, and we wouldn't be able to function as well as we can without every scholar who preceded us. So the copyright compliance is quite important, understanding where information comes from, what it is, images, texts, catalogs, raisonné, and being careful stewards of this cultural heritage. We are optimistic and eager to see responsible AI uses for this and other practices, and the guidelines are intended to evolve as technology changes, and we look forward to feedback from various participants in the field who are also invested in making responsible decisions using different tools.
So there are legal questions and also moral, ethical questions that we can be laid out. And my weakest link is anything to do with legal. But I thought I would ask you, from a legal perspective, what are the things that firms that are using AI for image analysis and attribution, what are the legal things that they need to be careful of? I imagine things like where they're getting their images and be careful of things that might be considered libelous in publications of their data? Or what are the things that you need to be aware of, both as a user, but also for firms that are using AI for image analysis?
Well, when you ask a question of a lawyer, you set yourself up for a very simple answer, and you also set yourself up for a very long answer. So to answer, I will say it depends on who is the user of the information. Whom am I speaking to? Am I speaking to a potentially newcomer to the AI and art authentication space? So they need to understand. They probably need to understand their model, and lawyers are not necessarily there to explain that part. But they also need to understand what they're putting into the model, and make the decisions and choices carefully. Have analysis of the opinions that they're putting in, of the content they're putting in, and once they know what the content is, if it's images, they have to understand where they come from, whether they need to be licensed or not. And I'm sure, and Carina will explain that better, it's not just images, right, that go into the data sets. It's important to give credit and to approach copyright holders in an early stage to then avoid having to go back and do this again. As far as the users of the AI models, be they collectors or other art market participants, they also need to understand what they're buying, right? It's they're not buying an insurance policy unless that's what they're being offered. They are giving an opinion, so they have to understand what it is that they have acquired. It's not a guarantee, right? And Carina, if you don't mind explaining, various percentages of certainties that are offered. So given the field is new, we're waiting and looking at the test cases. But what we need to avoid is assisting with fraud, because that's criminal activity and that's intentional setup for fooling a user. And I don't think that's what the AI models are interested in doing, because they're not human and they don't have these necessarily elements of personal enrichment that we probably need to worry about with other fraudsters.
Carina, can we pass this over to you?
Absolutely, absolutely. Going back, to the catalog raisonnés, I think it's quite important to realize that we as AI developers, we don't have that much control over what's in the catalog of a certain artist, because that's what we're using as a reference. So usually we use a catalog that's the best reference or the most accepted by the market. But, if there are misattributions, if there are errors in those catalogs that could impact the results eventually when they are discovered, we can't really know, so this is something that really needs to be clear. right from the start, that an AI company cannot take liability, over the training sets. And for the outcomes themselves, so yes, you have, as you said, Irina, what we always deliver are the AI assessments alongside with the probabilities. So very transparently. And because of this, I don't think we have any vulnerability on this side. We literally, communicate the results as they are coming out of the AI model. And we are also communicating, the sources of the training sets. And again, coming back to these training sets, as you both know for sure, there are cases where there is more than one catalog, for example, available. So Modigliani, etc. So what we are doing in those cases, we have created a sort of like expert scoring system. So we look through the literature, we check what the experts have said about potentially controversial artworks. And if the majority thinks that a certain art piece that's listed in the catalog is not by that artist, then we remove it. This system, it's still not perfect, obviously, but I think it's really, the most diligent and the most transparent that we could come up with, at least at this point in time, to make sure that our data sets are as reliable and also as defendable as possible.
So it's very early days in the world of AI as an art authentication tool, but Irina, are there any legal cases that you've heard about involving art attribution or authentication where AI image analysis proved pivotal in concluding the case?
Noah, I think it's too early to have a particular case on point. We are tracking, the center is tracking through our case law database as many art-related disputes as we can. And there are a number over 50 cases now involving AI models, but nothing dealing with art authentication. We have seen a number of cases where courts have been displeased with the use of AI-generated content, but again, not for the purpose of opinion provision, but more for creating fictitious precedent, for example, which has been cited by lawyers who didn't necessarily check all the content generated by the AI use. But to date, there hasn't been, to the best of my knowledge, use of AI results and findings for art authentication purposes.
So here's what I'm thinking is going to happen at some point. But no, I'll let you jump in, Carina, because I have this vision of what's going to happen sooner or later. But I'll get to that in a moment. Carina, please go ahead.
I just wanted to ask a related question because I looked, in preparation for this conversation, I looked actually on your database, the case law corner, you're calling it. I must say it's extremely impressive what you've put there together. No, I would be interested, Irina, to know, what are your thoughts for the future? It's true, of course, that it's still early days, but do you actually expect, this to happen soon? So sort of like AI, coming in as evidence sooner rather than late? And also, if you could share your thoughts on how you think that the presence of AI might impact litigation in the future.
Yes, I think we are living in a cyclical way. And so we've had forgeries introduced into the art market for the last 100 more years. Where there is demand, there is a growing supply, even though the artist might be deceased. So I think that AI usage for art authentication will be growing. And I think it's wise because we have a lot of data and it's difficult to analyze it fully. Maybe in one linear way, I think AI is a wonderful tool for that purpose. I think we probably will have battle of experts having diverging opinions. And I think that is a healthy discourse in general. One of the cases that comes to mind is the Thome versus Calder Foundation, where the judge actually said that, I think the judge said the work seems to be attributed to the artist, but the art market will not necessarily align with the legal opinion of the court, but will align with what the art market will feel is the right business decision. So I think the AI use in art authentication will be very helpful, but I don't think it will be swaying all the opinions consistently one way or the other. I think we'll still see precedent impacting the use of the results.
The sort of future fantasy that I have is an echo of the Wacker Van Gogh case from Amsterdam back in the 30s, where two experts couldn't agree with each other on which works in question were by Van Gogh and which were not, and then couldn't agree with themselves. One of them, Bart de la Faye, kept changing which ones he thought were autographed pictures and which weren't. And the judge kind of got frustrated and so called in effectively a tiebreaker, who was a Dutch chemist named Martin de Wilde, who did a chemical analysis of the pigments in authenticated Van Gogh works and in the questioned ones that had been sold by the Wacker family. And he found that pulverized lead and resin were present in the Wacker Van Goghs that were not present in any of the authenticated ones. And that would have a chemical effect of speeding up the drying of the oil paint so that it would more quickly look older. And that was the tiebreaker. And I'm wondering if we're going to see in the not so distant future an AI image analysis brought in as a tiebreaker where experts disagree, provenance looks okay, and forensic analysis looks okay of the materials. And then the question is, where do you go from there? And that's where I'm imagining that the way high-tech evidence like DNA evidence has been brought in to turn the tide in cases that maybe an AI image analysis might be in the future. But that requires effectively the legal system to feel confident in it, that it's a definitive tiebreaker. And where do you think we are in the story of that potentially happening?
I'm not sure. It's a great dream and forward-looking vision. I know there are about a handful of companies that are venturing into the space, and they all have their own competitive edges, and they all have their own models that they're building. I think there are courts that are set up not necessarily for us to use traditional legal system, but alternative dispute resolution mechanisms And specifically, there is a court for arbitration of art that was set up after the Nidler debacles, where a gallery was selling forgeries for too long and too many. And it was a very expensive undertaking to litigate all those disputes. So I think it's possible, of course, for AI model content to be used as a tiebreaker, perhaps in these arbitration settings or even judge presiding cases. It will be up to attorneys representing their clients to choose the models that they will want to bring in and present as their experts, effectively going back to the model of the battle of experts.
And that brings us back to our topic here. And Carina, just back in the future, I see a lot of firms adding AI to a list of services that it's basically the same services. They just like added a bullet point on their website that says AI analysis without explaining what it means and without details. Which system is it, open or closed? Where do they source the data? How many data points are involved?
You are absolutely right. I think it's a real challenge actually right now, that it's getting like harder and harder to tell like who's genuinely doing good work with AI and who's just using it, as a marketing buzzword. And I mean, I can also see that the temptation to stick, like AI everywhere is really high. I mean, it's in all over, service descriptions, even company names, even job titles, like everything must have, some kind of AI to make it sound good. And I mean, I think that's a big problem actually, because it undermines the credibility of the entire field, especially for us, right? So at the time when this technology, it's still trying to establish itself in the art world. I mean, it's more established, than 5 years ago, but still, I mean, there is a way to go. I think this is also, like, as we were saying earlier, one of the main reasons why we launched this initiative, so to encourage transparency. We want that everyone is open, about their systems, about their data sets, their methods, all of these things. And I think that way, anyone who's using or even evaluating these tools can make their own informed judgment about whether a company is truly using AI or is just like claiming to use it.
One of the useful elements of the framework that we developed, to me, is the glossary of the technical terms, because speaking as an attorney, I am curious about the AI models, but I don't know exactly how they're built. And the lingo to me is still not first nature, it's second nature. So it's very useful to understand what AI developers are using and doing. And I think demystifying the process, because, the fairy tales, we talked about them, they are quick to be told, and AI seems to be generating responses relatively quickly if you do a spell check or if you look for a list of places to visit in Italy. But if we know what goes into the model, I think we might be more trusting of the results.
Maybe so. Maybe to conclude, we talked about the legal side, although to answer that question in more detail, you of course need more specifics about what we're asking. But there's this moral or ethical side that I think is useful to encourage transparency, to not have people consider AI as a catchword in a black box, and then you don't get to see what's inside. And one of the things I admire about Art Recognition is they published their methodology in a peer-reviewed journal so that people can check if they want to. Now, how many people are going to go and look it up? Probably very few. But I like the move because it's demonstrating that we should be making our work transparent so people can have stronger faith in it. I'll ask both of you, what do you think are the moral and ethical issues that people should keep in mind, whether they're looking to hire a firm that uses AI or whether they're using it themselves?
Carina, why don't you start? It's a hard question.
Yes. I'm just improvising. So let's see. I think we did talk about the dangers that can arise when different companies, they train on incomplete data sets. I mean, coming back to how the conversation started. So I think that once all of this information will be put on the table, like, my view is that the users will be informed enough, so for them to be able to decide. I mean, really, do I trust this model or do I trust that other model? But for that, I mean, they really need to have all of the information. And I think this is really what's missing today. The fact that there is like general, extended black box all over the model. So we have tried, to extract like our own model out of this like grayish territory. But I think most of the models are still there, and because of that, the public perception puts like everything, back into so I'm really very hopeful, that what we are working on right now is going to determine the entire community, all of the others who are working on similar models to align and to publish, their technology and become more transparent about them as we did. Now, I'd like to add one other thought that just came to mind that is not strictly related to what we do, but also the negative impact, if I may call it like that the developments in the field of generative AI might have on what we do. Because you remember, when the whole like AI craziness started, everybody was just talking about Gen AI. So it's really good, I think, that what we're doing, known as predictive AI, by the way, that this is also like becoming more serious, more well known, so that artificial intelligence in the field of art is not just about creating images, But coming back to these developments in the field is that, the fact that Gen AI has become so advanced, that these models, they can meanwhile produce like incredibly convincing images in the style of well-known artists, basically. And then, if there is someone with enough criminal energy to take those digital images and transfer them on a canvas and then an AI painting, I think it can really easily make the way into the art market. And it doesn't have to be a famous artist. As you know very well, for the lesser known or for the less expensive artists, they tend to be, less scrutinized. So it's easier in those cases, like to bring forgeries, but AI forgeries, I suppose, also on the market. So I think this is really important, to be aware of this. And what we did, we've done few things essentially to stay ahead of this trend. And we started, for example, using these digital fakes, so produced by different Gen AI models, even commercial models, as negative examples, like into our learning. So essentially, to recognize, AI generated fakes if they ever be submitted to us on the canvas. So like as real paintings.
I like that, Carina. You're preparing to deal with forgeries already. You're forward thinking.
Yeah. We're fixing the immune system of the model.
So as I indicated, and as we know, there have been many forgers, master forgers, fakers in the past, and there will be more in the future. One of the artists, Ken Perenni, for example, he, to the best of my knowledge, never served time for his fakes, but he did write a very interesting autobiography, which he entitled Caveat Emptor, right? The buyer needs to be aware and beware. And it's hard to rely on one opinion. And it's we can anticipate that people will be disappointed at some point, whether it's with the decisions they've made or with opinions that they receive from well-meaning, intentional, educated experts. We've had a trend of authentication boards closing because of the lawsuits that were brought against them. Andy Warhol Foundation closed their authentication board and others. So I think we can't find the silver bullet that will solve all problems, but it's good to have tools that are assisting in the decision-making. And the ethics question, there'll be unethical people creating forgeries. We can model with our behavior and with our work what is ethical and, pay for content that needs to be licensed, for example. Maybe not all of the content all the time needs to be licensed, but giving credit to the scholars and artists who have contributed to the oeuvre is very important. And we'll see cases like the Knoedler Gallery by some chance selling forgeries. And I think it would be useful to have extra documents available in addition to provenance information, in addition to connoisseurs and scientific analysis reports and AI reports for this moment of decision-making. And sometimes it could be wrong. And so then we rely on warranties that auction houses offer, which allows for a bit of a time to come back and say, I didn't mean to buy a forgery. And they will say, I'm sorry, we didn't mean to sell you a forgery. But at some point, people will be holding on to what they have. It might be a sleeper and it might be authenticated down the line in a few decades, or it might be a work that will be reattributed and downgraded. So I think we need to be realistic that there's no silver bullet that will safeguard any and every artwork from change in its attribution.
While there's no silver bullet, there is a framework for suggestions on how to approach this. And I think this is a perfect moment to close the discussion for now, but this has been fascinating. So thank you very much. And I'd encourage any of our listeners to go have a look at the framework yourself. And until next time, thank you for listening. Thanks for listening. You can have a look at the guidelines yourself by visiting art-recognition.com or itsartlaw.org. Until next time. Thanks for listening to Is It, the podcast. This series is produced by Urshka Charney, presented by Noah Charney, and is brought to you by Art Recognition. Based in Zurich, Art Recognition is the leading firm for AI-driven authentication of artworks. Featured everywhere from the art newspaper to Wired to The Guardian and beyond, Art Recognition uses the most definitive, sophisticated datasets and advanced processes to estimate the likelihood that a specific artist created an artwork. Backed by a multidisciplinary team that takes many dimensions of research into consideration, Art Recognition has a long track record of success at the highest level. Learn more at art-recognition.com. That's art-recognition.com. We'll be back next time with a new art historical mystery, a new possible artist behind the masterpiece, and a new guest expert. See you next time.